Okay, session is being recorded. Okay. All right, so welcome back from lunch. And this is C-153A, and the real thing we're looking at today is how leaders can fail. And some of the ways that leaders can fail is through the inappropriate use of fear and anger, okay? And so we're going to talk about narrative cognitive ways to deal with those particular challenges, okay? So this concept is simple, but it's not easy to do, okay? And everybody knows that there's such a thing as fear and such a thing as anger. And these are things that are real human emotions. And as leaders, we are susceptible to these things actually causing us problems, right? Fear and anger can be a gift if used properly. It can be a curse if not used properly, okay? So fear can give us an urgency to act. It can also make us freeze. Anger can give us the aggression to be able to act quickly and aggressively, or it can cause us to become rash. Okay, so these are both things that we need to look at and be cautious of. Here's some course outcomes. Let's you read through that for a second. Okay, so we need to be willing to be curious. We have to be careful about judging others, because sometimes they can teach us something, and especially if their approach to something is different than ours, not necessarily a bad thing, might be a good thing. Being honest with ourselves, okay? And then we're going to talk about what I call child eye on, okay? We'll talk about that. And what do you think I mean by death acceptance? What does that mean? Am I advocating for people to become suicidal? No. Sure. And the way I would put it is this. A leader who is constantly afraid of getting killed is going to often be difficult. It's going to be difficult for them to operate. So this is a question for my person from Kurdistan. What does the word Peshmerga mean?
Peshmerga means a person who stays in the...
Sort of like a person who's accepted their death. So it's interesting. You'll find this interesting. When I was a combat advisor in Mosul, there came a point where I knew that when I was first there, they were waiting to see if I was going to be any good at my job, right? And they waited until we'd been through a couple of firefights. And at some point, I knew that I had arrived when they introduced me as Peshmerga, you know? And so, okay, I'm part of the family now, I'm in the tribe, and that's a good thing. And what they really were saying was, we've come to respect you enough, and we can count on you when we're in a firefight, okay? And so that's really what I'm saying is, accept the inevitability enough to take the fear of death off the table, okay? Because if we're military leaders, you're liable to have to lead people in uncertain, dangerous situations. Yes, ma'am.
Just like accepting the fate of whatever the outcome will be.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to put it. I mean, after all, we're sort of in the business of managing risk.
Yeah.
And sometimes the risk can be significant, right? And just accepting that. One of my fellow faculty members had a question. Is this like this guy? There's a guy in Band of Brothers, you know, that has this speech to one of the soldiers that says, you know, Ronald Spears says, hey, your problem is you don't realize you're already dead. The minute you do that, you can act with impunity and without regret, without mercy. That's not what I'm saying, okay? That's not, I don't want you to turn into some person like that. That's not the philosophy I'm advocating for. It's the management of the fact that things happen in low data, complex and chaotic situations that can sometimes cause emotional reactions. So how do we deal with that? Okay. But before we start, let's talk about leadership here. You know, this whole year is about leadership, right? You know, I mean, you're going to have somebody from the Department of Command and Leadership. You just saw him, Dr. Broadus, who's going to take you through all sorts of discussions on leadership theory and how it works, case leadership. Okay? But I would argue just about every class you'll get this year has something to do with leadership. Okay? The folks at the Department of Sustainment and Force Management It's about how leaders manage resources and assets. You'll have to do that. The folks in the Department of Joint Multinational Operations, the GMO, will say, hey, how do you operate in a joint environment? Dealing with operational and strategic issues. My department, Department of Army Tactics, how you can be a leader at the tactical level, say division and below, managing violence. And then the history department will help you get through the idea of how has leaders behaved in the past, and what does that mean to me? Okay, so I think everything. And so looking at this about creativity and about narrative cognition, leaders can either foster this or they can squash this. And what I'm hoping I can convince you today is to be the kind of leader that fosters this and nurtures it. Okay, so here's some perceptions we have, right? The standard boss versus the person who's leading from the front. Okay, there's a lot of discussion about what's the difference between a leader and a manager. Frankly, you have to do both. Okay, but it's knowing when to do which that's important. Okay, you're going to try to lead teams. You're going to try to lead through innovation. Networking, a lot of that will be happening this year. Okay, you're trying to find solutions. You're trying to develop strategies, communicate, manage goals. But that's not really what I'm talking about today. Okay, it's a little more basic. Okay, so what I want to do is show us every leader is unique. Does anybody know who that is? Frida Kahlo. Okay, so this is just an example of leaders in the art community, right? Rita came up with a new way of kind of painting and expressing. We got to look at John Bramlett's art. Remember that wonderful statement he said, painting and art is not about vision. It's about expressing ourselves and our emotions and our ideas and having others understand that. Okay? She's a leader in her field. How about this guy? Vincent van Gogh. Before he came up with this style of painting, it was kind of controversial. So he was a leader in that field in that regard. So look, there's many kinds of leaders as there are the people we have to lead, okay? That's just a fact. The leader is you. So whatever you bring to the table, your specific, unique characteristics of leadership is leadership. Okay? So what I want you to do is, this is on the left side, there's a Thinking Field Guide. I keep plugging for it. Download it, use it. Okay? And you notice at the bottom, it was written for us, for the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. Okay? So here's our first little exercise. I want you to think for a minute. Recall a time when you were a kid and you had the courage to split from the crowd. Okay? Because now what that'll do is help you think back to that time and then ask yourself the question, how can I find that youthful maverick now? Okay? So take a few minutes. I want you to list the 3 things that maverick would do in your job today. Okay? Take a couple minutes. Okay. Anybody brave enough to share your list of 3 things?
No judgment.
Okay. This is a safe place. No judgment. Yes.
So for like 3 things, when it comes down to like maverick being like an independent kind of minded person, I still have, I think, a bit of that. But like, if I had to think about like what a youthful maverick would do, like I would skateboard to work. Now knowledge, I was like, there's a lot of risk in doing that. You probably shouldn't do that. I would change jobs at 14 years in service because it was just like, I think there's cooler things about that job, and that's cooler, therefore I'll do it. And I'm kind of doing that anyway. And I would not do like any homework at all.
Okay.
I do some now to compare it.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have anything else that they'd like to share?
I was struggling because I was like a little goody two shoes as a kid.
Okay.
The opposite of a maverick. But I was like really careful not to cuss.
Okay.
And all my friends were doing it.
Okay.
And I think that was like, dedication to like whatever I do, wherever I got that from, like I shouldn't do that. You know, that was like dedication to that ideal, a disdain for like being popular or caring what other people thought, and like a lot of self-discipline because it'd be so easy to do that. I don't know.
Okay. So there's one of the reasons why I want you to think about this, because it goes back to this discussion with the Army Research Institute that I mentioned to you. You know, they're trying to study how to get leaders to encourage people to be Nostradamus. Remember I said, you know, don't be Dan Rather and report the news, be Nostradamus and tell me what's going to happen next. How do you develop those people? Because they don't just happen by accident, right? You know, so one of the guys I went through the red team course with this summer, and you know what the red team course is? You know what red teaming is?
Is that SoCal?
It was out at Tradoc actually. But I mean, so red teaming is this process where we pre-mortem plans, right? So post-mortem is like you see a body on the ground, what caused the body? So that's the effect, what's the cause? And so red teaming is trying to do that ahead of time, right? Pre-mortem. Hey, what would cause the plan to fail, right? And so, interestingly enough, sometimes in the military, your mavericks are afraid to let you know who they are because they've been punished for being a maverick, speaking from experience. And Dr. Rob McCleary out at the red team, he was a Marine for a whole career, and he was an avid cartoonist, but he didn't want people to know this. Okay, and the reason why was when he was at Annapolis, he would do a weekly cartoon, and he would post it on a bulletin board in the common area, and it was usually a cartoon poking fun at Annapolis. Okay, you know, there's another. You've ever heard of Bill Malden? Okay, so some of the cartoons that you've seen are Malden cartoons from World War II. He was a Stars and Stripes guy. And Bill used to have all these cartoons. He had one cartoon poking fun at Third Army and General Patton. Patton wanted him court-martialed. So, I mean, it's in the military context, sometimes being a cartoonist and a sarcastic person can get you in a little trouble. So Rob, same thing happened to Rob. Rob ended up the subject of an investigation. And they tried to throw him out of Annapolis. And his SAC officer came to his rescue and prevented this from happening. And his SAC officer happened to be a Marine, and that's why Rob chose, instead of going into the Navy, decided to say, I'm going to be a Marine. My point being is Rob was an avid cartoonist, but now he's been trained. Hey, maybe that's not something to let people know. You can get in trouble for doing this. I don't want to be that guy. And so later on, he's at 29 Palms, and there's a competition for a recruiting ad campaign that you could get a cash prize if you won the prize for the best cartoon. So he draws a cartoon and asks his wife to submit it and collect the cash prize because he didn't want anybody to know in his unit that he was the cartoonist that created it. But if you had somebody like Rob in your formation, would that person be useful to you? I would argue yes. I think you want to identify these people, but sometimes they get punished for letting you know. They've been a maverick, and then somebody said, don't do that because that's not living up to our institutional norms. But the problem with that is, if you want to identify exceptional information, if you want to be Nostradamus, you want to encourage these types of people to do what they do and not punish them for being innovative and creative thinkers. In fact, what you really want to do is draw that out of all your people because, as I said earlier, all of you are creative. You just may not know the level which. And I think we said, hey, I can be creative in one way, maybe not somewhat creative in other. That's fine. My argument is how do we accelerate the rate to which we all are creative, right? Because have you ever seen a commander that's really good at telling what's going to happen next? Have you ever seen one of those? I've had a couple, right? They're mysterious, right? It's like ESP, right? They're like, how did they know that the enemy is going to come there with this much combat power, and this is what they thought the task and purpose they were trying to accomplish, and they were pretty close? That's because they're got experience, they got education, they're good at visualizing. Wouldn't it be great if we could accelerate the rate to which you could take your junior people and close the gap between those senior visualizers who are good at it and them? Because if we're all visualizing together and willing to be innovative mavericks,
we're going to have a better chance of identifying exceptional information before it emerges and be ready for it. Okay? All right. Okay, so really this is what we're trying to focus on today. Leaders tend to fail by misusing a couple things. Okay, so here's problem one. If I become afraid, I might freeze mentally. And we might even slow down our reaction time or even just completely stop. Okay? These are the portions of the brain that eliminate when that happens. Problem two, I might become overly aggressive, maybe a little bit rash in trying to micromanage events instead of flexing with them. And finally, we end up with mission creep, and we might lose focus, forget what it was we were attempting to do. So problems 1, 2, and 3 are real problems. I'm sure you guys have experienced them, okay, and observed leaders who can handle this type of situation well and some who don't. Okay, so it's connected to fight or flight, or fright or fight as it's known. And that's problem 1, problem 2. And am I saying that when we have these problems, we should just take a time out, root to the earth, come in contact with my chi, right? Disengage in mindfulness and meditation? I'm not saying that those are wrong things, but that might not work when you're under the gun, yeah? That's not what I'm saying, okay? Because actually the fight or fright is actually intelligent. It's useful, okay? Because it helps you deal with this. Has anybody ever heard of VUCA in here? VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. VUCA lives over here on the left side of the Cynefin frame. Okay? You have very little VUCA over here on the right side when it's high data and everything's susceptible to systems thinking and divergent and convergent thinking. But over here where there's low data, complex, and chaos, VUCA tends to be there. And that's where you'll have to manage these emotions. And how to manage emotions like that? There's ways to emotionally reset yourself. Okay? So here's what I want you to do. Is I want you to think about the time when you've had to succeed and then you had to tell your brain you've done this before. Okay? So that's exercise 1. Here's an illustration, right? This is Dr. Angus Fletcher as a child. And as a kid growing up in Scotland, he had a teacher that bullied him and made him, afraid to even get on the bus to school in the morning. And he managed to find a way to marshal the courage to stand up to the teacher. And so this is his narrative that he tells himself when he's facing something that makes him afraid or angry, that he might not be able to accomplish what he's trying to do. Do we have something like that? Do you have something like that? That's what we want to do, is look at that, okay? So here's what I want you to do. Take out a pen and paper and look for that story in your life, okay? So write down every detail you can remember of that story, and then when you have written down all those details, go back and circle the moment where you knew, I'm going to do this. This is actually going to happen. I'm going to get this done. And this will be a very powerful primer for emotionally resetting, okay? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Go ahead and do that, starting now. Okay. What did this teach you? What did you get out of this experience? Did you find anything? Anyone brave enough to share their experience?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
So, maybe you guys who talked to me were like, what the heck is that thing on your arm? This is a weapons school patch on the Air Force and Space Force side. You guys don't know what that is. It's a 6-month, very rigorous leadership, instructorship, problem-solving school where you are likely spending more time with the people like in a room like this versus your family, right? And 6 months of about 18-hour days, if I recall.
Okay.
Okay, there are multiple days where I basically said, and we'll try to keep it corporate for your, screw this, I don't want to do this crap anymore.
Sure.
I'm away from my house, I'm not near any of my old stuff, I have no ways to fix that. And so what I did is, before I left, and this is a recommendation from a buddy of mine who I threw in, I wrote down a list of all of the reasons why I'm doing this, and it came to 42.
Wow.
So what I did is I kept that in the front of my binder, and I kept it in my desk, the dorm room. And every time I basically hit the F it button, when I get close to it and look at that, there's nights I would sleep, like, ponder why the hell am I doing this? I probably lost a couple of years of my life doing that, just sheer work, but that was a contributing factor that helps push through the exam.
Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Appreciate that. You see how that's a powerful way to emotionally reset? You know what I mean? I kind of equate this to, the little engine that could, because I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. The older you get, so I'm 61, I have a lot of these stories, and they're very encouraging to me, because whenever I face a big challenge, being able to look back and, hey, I've done tough things before, I can do this. So it's very helpful. Anybody else, please? Yes, sir, please.
I got one that's toxic motivation. And so I wouldn't say that it's like the most challenging, but it's definitely one of the most challenging was writing a thesis in grad school.
Okay.
And some of the constraints were like a lot of time constraints. So it was height of COVID 2020 in Boston, so everything was shut down. We had very young kids that were home all day because schools were shut down, but grad school didn't stop. And so both my wife and I were in grad school doing thesis at the time.
Wow.
So it was like, how are we, like, there was like, we got a neighbor to watch the kids like 2 hours tops. And we tried to like cram like productivity. So like trying to balance having an active family, like that we're actively doing things that we all enjoyed, and those like made it very stressful. And so the point where I realized like, hey, wait, this is gonna work was I think I got past like the background section, like 30 pages in, and I saw, and I say toxic motivation because I saw someone else's thesis defense, and I was like, that sucks. But I at least have that, and that just turned everything around. I was like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Not the best wellspring of motivation to pull from, but it was motivation nonetheless.
That's actually important, because sometimes looking around and going, hey, so now I'll give you an example. My boss, when I was working here, I first retired 2010, and for the first, I want to say 7 years I was working here, I had the same boss, and for us in the military, that's like nothing. You never have this. I told, his name was Scott Porter, he was a retired armor officer, and I said to him, boss, the only adult male that has had this much influence on my personal development is my dad, and so he sat me down one time and said, Rich, I really think you should go for your doctorate. I think you could make a big contribution to the body of knowledge. And I was having this personal existential crisis, because to me, as an artillery guy and, combat guy, like that sounds like something someone else does. I can't possibly be that guy. And my wife sat me down and she said, hey, do it or don't do it, but don't not do it because you don't think you're smart enough, because you're plenty smart enough. And I did it. And that was a real encouragement to me to go, hey, maybe I can do this. Yes, ma'am. Did you raise your hand?
No, I'm listening to you.
Okay. All right. So anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I can share mine. So I was a correctional officer for Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Texas, maximum security prison.
Okay.
Matter of fact, they have Yolanda Salazar. She was at prison. I got to meet her. So one time there, I had to engage in a use of force. It was my first use of force, where I got spit on, Casey stole at me, I got kicked, which left a large imprint on my tie. So after that, I was like, I quit. I am not going to do this. I'm not going to be belittled and degraded by these prisoners. And I was so negative at first because emotionally I was like just angry and sensitive and all of that. But all of that comes with the job and the territory. So I went home and I we evaluate. At the time, I was a single mom. I had a 3-year-old, and I started looking at that. I need money. I have bills to pay. I have a son to take care of. I have to get out my emotions and go back out there and be the best CEO I can be. And that's what I did.
So you can go back in that and say, okay, there was a huge challenge and I had to overcome it. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So after I had my second kiddo, my kids are all 20 months apart almost to the day, so they're close together. My husband was deployed when I had my second kid. And so effectively I was a single mom, but like also in the military. And so it has its, its own dynamics. Anyways, I got really bad postpartum anxiety and depression. And so I ended up having like just really illogical thoughts, just the whole gamut. And so one thing that I realized through that experience was like, man, you really don't know until it's you. And so when people say you don't understand, like if you've never been through it, you really don't. And so that was a little bit of a motivating factor for me as a nurse, right? Because you kind of have that other component to it. But I just remember specifically a couple of instances of just like really being like so just done. Like wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I was just done. But what kept me going was my husband wasn't there and who was going to take care of those kids, And so you just go through the motions and then slowly and slowly it gets better. So the theme was like, just keep showing up.
Yeah.
Just keep showing up and eventually it got south. And it did. And so I don't have like a specific defining moment like, I can do this. It was like, I just have to keep showing up for them. And so that is pretty much what pulled me out of it.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you for, and I can see as a healthcare provider that also helps you be a little more empathetic for other people.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you get it, it's interesting that you should bring that up because after my last tour, I had to struggle with post-traumatic stress. And my wife and I started something called the Combat Trauma Healing Group at the chapel. We did that for 4.5 years, helping couples who are dealing with post-traumatic stress. And it was very cathartic for me.
Yeah.
Because there are times when things are going wrong with your head and you're going, gee, I had folks say to me, am I going nuts? No, you're not going nuts. You're just having a normal reaction to an abnormal experience. It's not a character flaw.
Right.
It is, okay? Mm-hmm. And getting past that. So thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Anybody else?
So I'll share mine. So
Thank you.
For me, it was, I despise roller coasters.
Okay.
And my kids, which are between 14 and 6 now, but so a couple of years ago, we started taking them to, when they were very young, we started taking them to amusement parks wherever we were. And they started liking the rides naturally. They got a little older, the rides got a little bigger. So I tried to prep myself up when they were little to go on the rides because they were so excited to be there and to have myself be with them that someday they're going to get bigger. And so, we did go for a while. Then it's about 3 years ago, we went to Hershey Park. So the kids were probably 10-ish. They were close in age to the 3-year-old, 3 to 4-year-old ones. So then they were able to go on one of the bigger rides, which to me were still not interested at all. So, but I wanted to be there for them. I didn't want to be the boring dad. I wanted to spend time with them, and so it was very important to me to do that. So I put away all the fear that I had about going on one of these roller coasters, talk myself into going, and struggled the whole time we were flying because I'm just everything is going through my mind about like what could go wrong or it's going to be hard or all this kind of stuff like that. So then I got in the seat. Then it was really even very difficult, obviously, because at that point you can't get out. So went on the roller coaster. It really wasn't until the end that I felt like, okay, I've not accomplished the fear, but definitely have pushed it aside. And then because of that, though, we now go on multiple roller coasters down. And it always got easier. It's not something I'm not looking to go on. But because of that, that aspect has been easier in my life, and it's been important to me. But I've also seen how that branched off into other avenues where it's like the point here is, okay, I did that. How can I look back on that moment? And I really continually think of
that being a big catalyst when it comes to doing something that I either don't want to do or it's hard to do, or I really have to push through it. So,
Thank you for sharing that. You know, what my observation is, you know, it's almost like you realize that you loved your kids more than you were afraid of the roller coaster.
yeah.
And that's a great motivation to get after, right? You know, because sometimes when we're afraid of something, you know, so for example, you probably have noticed that I'm no, you know, I'm sort of like, I fit in the Army, sort of like one of those, you know, square pegs in a round hole kind of a thing. And people will go, why in the world are you here? I didn't expect to find something like you here. But I love the Army because of the soldiers, because of you guys. I want to be a part of helping you guys be the best you can possibly be. I don't know if you heard, like during Colonel Norris's, I think it was Colonel Norris's comments the other day in the auditorium, where he said, our job is to get you as lethal as possible, to make you the best you can be. And that's, you know, I had this interesting revelation when I first started teaching here. I said, what's my product? I was trying to apply that metaphor. And first I thought it was that you guys are my customer. No, you're my product. My customer is the American people, and you will lead their children into combat. And so I gotta get you guys as best you can possibly be, so you can do that. Let me share mine real quick. I've been listening to you guys are the third iteration for me, so I've heard a lot of your colleagues, and there's some really cool stories. It's just been encouraging to listen to this. You know, like one person who went through Ranger School didn't think he was going to ever make it through, and then somehow, against all odds, he's there at the end. Or one person who went through SEER training, and it's so horrible, and you're being treated like dirt. And then there's the moment when they bring you into this room and they move your blindfold, and there's the American flag, and they're playing the Star Spangled Banner, and it's like you're all this, you know, this powerful emotions. For me, it was the longest and hardest deployment I had. It was the most dangerous. And when I managed I got hit with 2 IEDs on the first day on the job in Mosul, and on the last day on the job, and a whole bunch of them in between. And so there was this, you know, you had to fight this belief that I just might not make it through this experience. You know what I mean? The law of averages is eventually going to get me. And when I got back, they said, okay, you're ripped out, you're going to the American front. And, but I didn't believe I would make it out of there yet, because, you know, there's always indirect fire attacks, and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm sitting there in Mosul, and then Diamondback is this airfield, and there's a C-130, and I can get on it, and it's got a tail name, the Rock. And I got flown out of Iraq in the Rock, and it was that moment that I realized I'm going to make it out of here in peace, you know. And so these are powerful memories, right? Remember I said in the motor cortex over here on the left side of the cabin frame, it's all about narrative cognition, right? These stories are powerful tools to help you manage because look, first of all, we're leaders because we want to be here. There's passion involved in that. If you weren't passionate about it, I doubt you'd be here, right? So that's something to accept, but we have to manage that passion. But sometimes that can be a tool to help us when we're dealing with fear and with anger and when things are tough. This can help us be more resilient, okay? All right, any other thoughts or observations before we do this? Why don't you go ahead and take 10, rest those neurons. Please don't use cell phones, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back from break. That was a great discussion, first hour, appreciate it. Okay, so let's continue our discussion on this. So, why is it that we think that emotion reset is a good thing rather than just disassociating with it? Well, because that fight or fright response is actually intelligent and useful. It's actually helpful to us, okay? Because it helps us deal with this. Okay, VUCA is a reality. It lives over here on the left side of the Cynefin frame. We're usually dealing with low data in complexity and chaos, okay? We're here because our ancestors were able to manage this, okay? And they didn't do it through logic, typically. They did it through narrative, okay? Now, it's almost like we're all, thousands and thousands of years ago, we're all sitting around the campfire, and I say I went on a hunting trip over here and almost got eaten by a bear, but we have assets over there we need. So what do we do about the bear? And that story becomes, it drives, first of all, survival, it drives creativity and adaptation and innovation, And we can even use it as part of our legends for our tribe, right? You know, we can tell that story. And it just spurs creativity, okay? And VUCA typically is one of the biggest inspirations for it, right? Our legends for how people have survived things. It's almost like that exercise we just went through, right? When we look at some of these stories, when we see how other people have survived tough things, it's encouraging to us as well, right? When we read about leaders in the past, especially in military leaders, and see how they overcame great adversity, it typically is narrative cognition that reminds us that, well, if they can do it, so can we. We have as much a chance as they did of succeeding facing VUCA, okay? But there's a caveat to this, okay? We don't want to be that guy, right? We don't want to be the leader that flips out and says, oh my God, what's happening? Everybody stay calm, everybody stay calm. Can't go running through the perimeter screaming, oh my gosh, we're all going to die. No, you don't want that. That's not a good thing, okay? So it's smart, and, you know, it tries to tune itself to your current environment. And so, but there are times that, you know, it can become overly sensitive, and that's why emotion reset is necessary, because it again can take that fear of death or fear of failure off the table and allow you to function. Okay? Now there are times we get surprised, right? Have you ever had that feeling where you got surprised and maybe even stunned, that you're like, wow, I'm not sure what to do, right? Sort of like this guy. I assure you, he got back up again, right? He certainly did, right? And so that's how this reset helps us. It's like a protocol that helps us, when surprised and stunned, you know, get back up again and re-engage. You know, it's almost like in some of the stories that were shared in here, you know, being able to say, okay, that was horrible. I got attacked by somebody and I want to quit, but I'm not going to quit because I've got a reason, right? I don't want to go on a roller coaster because I really don't enjoy that, but I love my children more than I'm afraid of that roller coaster, right? Or I'm experiencing depression and I don't know what to do about it, and my brain is not cooperating with me right now, but I'm going to get back up, okay? Okay, now the fact is VUCA is a real thing. It just is, okay? And you will probably experience it in some way, shape, or form. It really depends on what context you're in. If you go to combat, I guarantee you're going to experience this. Less in a garrison environment, but it's still possible. Yeah, you never know when you're going to find it. If you go back to being a corrections officer, you might find it at any given time, right? So this is something where it's a helpful tool. So you either have fear or anger, and you will have to find ways to use that emotion smart, right? What is this smart emotion telling you? Okay? So here's sort of the origins of fear and anger, okay? So I want you to get into a little thought experiment with me for a few minutes here. So you're in a room, and there's no doors and windows. How does that make you feel?
Scared.
Trapped, scared, sure, afraid, okay? Okay? And even though I'm not saying we're putting you in an actual room, you know, I mean, if you really wanted to, you go to the escape room down in Leavenworth and actually have this experience with yourself in real time. But what this is a metaphor, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't matter what context we're in. It could be I'm dealing with a roller coaster ride, I'm dealing with corrections, I'm dealing with depression, whatever it is. It's that trapped and afraid feeling. But the door opens. Now how do you feel?
Is it dark?
You're anxious, but you also see an exit, right? So this gives you maybe a chance to get away. It's the only exit. Absolutely. Okay? You're less scared, hopefully. You know, it helps you, but you might still feel stressed, right? But that is your door, is your only way out, and you have to get through it. So your brain has to turn a little aggressive, right? Because that fear that you felt that might have tempted you to be frozen is now you're going to have to get the urgency to act, right? Okay? And that's really kind of how fear and anger originated, right? Fear is telling you have got no other options that you can see. And anger is telling you, I have one path and I've got to get out of here. Okay? And so there's that emotional reset helps you be more rational, right? If an opponent or an enemy does something to scare you badly enough where they get you to do what they want you to, that's not what you want, right? If they entice you into the ambush that they're trying to lure you into, okay? So that's why the emotional reset is helpful. Okay, so why do these exist? We need to be able to respond positively to these emotions, right? Why do we feel this way? Why do we get aggressive or scared? Okay, so we don't want to be this, right? That we have to have a plan. A plan allows you to act, right? And you don't want to be the turtle that's just kind of pulled in your head and you're all your feet and there you are. So our brain has a bias for action, and especially so in the military. You know what I mean? There was an old saying by Nathan Bedford Forrest who said, "One man moving is worth 3 men standing still." Okay, so we tend to believe that in the Army. We do think that, you know, at some point we've got to act. Sometimes we act too soon, sometimes we act too late, but we do have a bias for action. The other thing we have to worry about is to not succumb to herd mentality, right? Because it's simple. If everybody's doing it, right? When you're a private, and I was a private back in 1985, I know that seems an awful long time ago, but in 85 I was a private. You show up at basic training, how do you know where to go get something to eat? You follow the crowd, right? You know, and sure enough, you get to the dining facility, you know, follow your nose. If nothing else, follow the people, and they're bound, especially if they've been here a little bit longer than you, they know where the dining facility is, okay? But sometimes, especially for us field grades, following the herd may be a really bad idea, okay? And sometimes people will do this because of fear and avoiding of anger, right? Because if everyone's doing it, it must be right? Not necessarily. Any armor folks in here? Any tankers? No tankers. So this is the thing that tankers used to say. Simple plans violently executed, okay? All right, so, you know, being able to act before your opponent and with quick speed, you know, and being able to overcome whatever they might bring to the table, right? It's more likely to work if you act fast, okay? But then you have to also resist being overcome by your emotions, right? Have you ever faced a situation where your emotions tempted you to take actions that might burn out your team? Has anyone ever seen that? I've seen leaders do that. I've been the victim of it a couple times at least. Right? Anybody ever had that experience? What did it look like? What were some of the clues that it was happening?
In my experience, it's not combat careful, but
That's fine.
in Red Hill Towers, I'm sure you're familiar, right? The jet fuel in
Okay.
Hawaii. The majority of our Navy personnel, well, all of them evacuated, and so we had to pay them to stay in hotels for 120 days. And our commander decided that instead of, in my department, my organization was who did that pay the entire thing. So the standard was give it to them within 14 days. Our decided, no, I'm a superstar, we're going to do it within 4. So we activated a swarm team, which brought in all of our paid personnel, enlisted. We only had a team of 8, and we worked them 7 days a week for 12 to 16 hours a day.
Wow.
So we accomplished it.
You got the mission done.
But we had suicidal ideation, we had aggressive behaviors, we had people begging to go back to sea early. We still have people that won't come to that command because they know that happened.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's kind of what I feel like you're talking about is like we pushed to do a mission that we didn't have to push quite that hard, and you burn out people. We had a retention issue where the majority got out as soon as they could.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because that's a very common thing, isn't it? How many here heard that story and thought, I've seen that?
It's a all the time.
I've seen it, okay? I'm sure a lot of you have. So let's see if we can use narrative cognition. You knew that leader better than the rest of us. What was the story that caused that leader to do that? do you think?
I mean, from my perspective, I think that he had had some failures and he needed to prove worth and value. So instead of going by just achieving the DoD standard or what had been assigned by his superior saying, this amount of days is fine, he needed that self-validation. I can do it faster. And I'm that much of a better leader, I will do it. And didn't really think through or frankly care what that costs, of course.
Okay. So, and then we lost a lot of talent, right? That decided to get out of the Navy, or people who begged to go back to sea early. Has anybody been to an organization and seen this? Okay. Have you ever been to an organization that feels like you showed up at the little Battle of Little Bighorn, and there's all these bodies all over the place? You're like, oh my gosh, what happened here? Right? It's that feeling, right? It's like something bad happened here, and now our job is to somehow fix that. Okay, I've been in that place. Okay, one of my most proud moments was the unit I was a 3 in initially, and I showed up and I could see I had a similar leader. They had a narrative that they were trying. I got to be the best, sir, right? From MIB, Man in Black, and Captain America here. So excited he's here. He doesn't know why he's here. He's the best. And it was one of these leaders that felt like they were always given one of those football coach speeches you see in movies. You know what I mean? Let's go win one for the Kipper. And it was like, and he loved meetings, and he loved the sound of his voice. And there was times you're like, hey, this is going to be another one of those long days because we've got a 3-hour meeting that could have been 1 hour or even an email. And I could still be in the motor pool accomplishing the mission. We're trying to get ready to go to NTC, the National Training Center, and we got all this equipment we're taking with us. Anyone here deployed to that? Everyone been there? Is there enough time in the day to get everything done? Yeah, you're just overwhelmed, and you're running the risk of getting ticked off because your junior people, they don't see the reason why there's a sense of urgency. And oh, by the way, if you make it even more stressful, when I was going through this, it was the fall of 2002, and we didn't have OIF yet, but it looked like it was about to happen, and I was pretty sure that we were going to go. And so me and the XO were desperate to get ourselves squared away, and we knew we needed to go to NTC. So that's really one of those things. We had a lot of people who were very unhappy, but I will tell you, and that leader ultimately gave up command while deployed, and we got this really great leader in who not only was able to realize, hey, look, this is combat. I mean, artillery, do we have this love of keeping people awake? I mean, that's what I feel like. Aviators know better, right? Any aviators in here? Yeah. We all give you a hard time about your sleep plans, but let's face it, people who don't get enough sleep over a long period of time, their capabilities degrade. Okay? So that's where burnout can come from, and you don't want that. You want to get the most out of your organization as possible, but you don't want to run them into the ground either. So you have to find this balance. How do I coax out of them the best they can be without destroying them or running them out of the service? Because that does happen, right? A little story, I remember when I had a horrible job for a year. I was a speechwriter for the commanding general. I learned how to write. That was good, but it was unpleasant. And my office mate was the SGS for the post. He was a deputy SGS. So this is the guy, the Secretary of General Staff. And so one of his additional duties was to look at the refrad paperwork, the relief from active duty. So officers who are getting out of the Army, in this case. And we had 2 units on that post that were sort of notorious for opposite reasons. There was one brigade that had this amazing commander that was always doing cool, innovative, always thinking out of the box. Everybody would follow this guy over a cliff. They just loved it. And then across the street was another brigade, which we informally called the Village of the Damned. Okay? And we had this little group of guys that back then we still had an officers club, and the captains in the post headquarters would meet up there every Friday night over beer. We would discuss all the ills of the world. And the thing was called DisCapSoc, the Disgruntled Captains Society. Okay? And so DisCapSoc convened one day, and Ron presented, hey, you know, when you get ready to go to the captain's career course, that's a big decision, right? Because if you go to the course, what happens? You incur service. You can't just get out. And so that's a decision. Do I go to school and incur service, or do I get out? So there was the brigade that was the no good brigade, had about 17 folks who were considering this. And I think there was 18 folks in the other brigade. So Ron said, okay, what do you all think? What are the numbers of refrat packets for each brigade? What would you say? So what would you all say?
It's going to be
17 on that one.
And, yeah, how about the good one?
0.
2.
One out of that one. And we all wanted to know, okay, why'd that one leave? And he said, yeah, there was extenuating circumstances. His family had a farm that they'd owned for 100 years, and his father had a health issue and couldn't take care of it, and it had to be worked. Otherwise, he would have stayed in the Army because of his experience with that commander. So, which of those commanders is doing the most good to the service, for the service? The one that's getting rid of everybody is running off talent that we've already invested in, right? The one that's got just one leaving is investing in the future. Have you ever run into this? Because if you haven't done it yet, you will. Where you look at some youngster that's coming to work for you, and you're like, that's a really smart person right there. They're capable. And have you ever played the 20 questions of who did you work for last? Or the, you know, and in our communities, I mean, in the artillery community, we know, you know, these are the people that eat their young, and here's the people that don't. Okay? And the people that don't tend to be some folks that are really dynamic, and they leave their fingerprints on everybody, and they're known for it. It's like, wow, well, I wish I'd actually worked for that person. And there's a couple of those in my life where I look back and go, for example, the guy that helped me get this job in 2010 had been my boss in 1995. And he had been my mentor ever since. And he said to me one day, Rich, I think you'd be a good tactics professor. You should come up here when you get ready to retire. And he helped me get the job. He put in a good word for me, and that's why I'm here. So, I mean, this business of knowing the difference between, hey, how I can keep from alienating my team and not burning them out, I would argue the opposite of that is how to build them up. Especially when we're talking about narrative cognition and creativity, how do I coax that out of them, right? You know, I wanted to write a book about my experience as a combat advisor. You know, we had, our team's call sign was Team Phoenix. So I was Phoenix 6. And the Iraqis loved this because they know what a phoenix is. And a phoenix is this hopeful symbol, this bird emerging from the ashes, right? And what I wanted to call the book was Coaxing the Phoenix Out of the Ashes, right? And I would say that's a good metaphor for you guys. How do I get out of my people the most I can and not damage them, but still getting the highest performance out of them, to help them learn what their potential is? Because I think one of the things that we don't do as well as we could is knowing how to see the potential in our people and coax it out of them, right? Have you ever seen anybody that's really good at that? Have you ever witnessed that? Yeah, what did that look like? Do you have an example? Anything. Like anybody who could get you to be more adaptive and innovative than you thought you were capable of doing.
There's always people who will, senior leaders who will invest a lot in people that think have potential, but then after 5 years they'll end up dropping their packets and just getting out here, and all we have left is people who were not invested in, not because they didn't have the potential, but they still strove to continue that service.
Okay. Well, do you have anybody in your life though that did that for you though, invested in you?
Yeah, one, and his leadership philosophy was really based on like Miracle, like the movie from like the hockey team.
Yeah.
Yeah, a very similar leadership style to the coach.
Okay.
I can't remember the coach's name. So it worked well with me. I responded to it very well. But anybody that's seen that movie knows that coach is very harsh, and if you don't live up to the standards, you're not going to be on the team.
Sure.
And that was kind of like, it varied, right? It worked for some people to grow that talent. Obviously, it didn't work for others that maybe weren't going to flourish in that environment. So it worked well for me, but I also saw people that were just as talented as me not respond well to that, and they are now probably out of the Army.
Okay. So what I'm trying to coax out of you guys is, did you have anybody, so maybe you didn't want to emulate everything about him, but something about him you did want to emulate. I get, right? So I think most of us have somebody that we've served under, we go, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be like them. You know? And so it's not a bad narrative to identify what other things, because as you just shared, Trevor, it's like some things that he did I really like, some of the things I didn't like. Okay, so let's maximize those things we really like and then emulate those and be prudent enough to say, I'm not going to do that. For me, it wasn't just the boss I had in the 90s, but his boss, which was the brigade commander, a guy named Michael T. Maples. And Colonel Maples at the time went on to be a general. Okay, and he was incredibly good at coaxing innovation out of people. And he was an artillery commander, which was really surprising to me that he would be this way, because my experience up till then was, you know, it's a math equation, and you follow the steps. And he wasn't like that. I mean, he knew that was important, but he was incredibly good at building deception plans in exercises that completely stymied the world-class op force. And we beat them at one point in an exercise, which is rare. You know, we came up with this innovative way to get the enemy to let us know where their big artillery units were by deceiving them as to where we were and luring them in. And then coaxing them to fire by using something that we called at the time an artillery ambush, where we would put one cannon out there, have it shoot and then run, and see if they would all light up. And then we would turn on our radar, which was now in range, along with a whole bunch of MLRS launchers, and we destroyed that whole formation. And it was like, you know, the brigade commander involved me in that discussion. And where you don't want to burn your people out, one way to encourage them is to pull out the things that are innovative about them. Because now that's the opposite of burnout. This is validating, it's energizing, especially when you get a success, right? Where you destroy an entire op 4 formation, now all of a sudden you feel like you could pick up a truck and throw it somewhere, right? And so that's like finding the opposite of kryptonite. That's kryptonite right there, burning your people out. Finding the opposite is what you want, okay? And one way to do this is what I call taking a first step, right? And creating a plan, or what I call a first step plan, right? Sometimes when you're facing a challenge, it's easy to just say, I'm just going to wait and see if I can figure something out. It's just a solution will present itself. First step is really very helpful, right? And it's not a bad metaphor to show sort of like the physical therapy thing here on the left. You know, just learning how to be able to make the first step and then create a second plan, okay? So how do you do this? How do you create that second plan, right? So this right here. Have you ever had the experience where something caused you to shorten your gaze? Have you ever had that experience? So what was that like? What caused that? Here, I'll share my experience. So what shortened my gaze was on 15 September 2006. We got hit. I was on a patrol with my Iraqi unit, but I was with my Iraqi commander in the back of a Stryker vehicle, and so the two of us were doing air guard in the back of this thing. And we did that because we could then talk to the American maneuver commander that we were working with, and then my Iraqi commander could talk to his people, and we could coordinate our activities. And then I had my interpreter, and we could coordinate actions. Well, as we were moving through a neighborhood in southern Mosul, an SV bid was exploding at us. I was 35 meters from that explosion. And I was fortunate enough because there was a sniper threat, so I'd stepped off the ledge. So I'm now down on the floor, so I'm like this. So the blast didn't hurt me as bad as it could have, but it completely, all of a sudden, my whole view of the world, just like this. That's all I could see. And what jerked me out of that experience was 2 rounds going right past my right ear. AK-47 was shot at my Iraqi commander who was behind me. And so that brought me back up to the horizon. Now that's an extreme example of that, but that's what I mean when you're looking at this. The first step plan for me was to return fire, right? And so I've got to try to take out the threat, or at least respond to the threat. You see what I'm going after here? Does anybody have anything like that? Where you've seen that tunnel vision thing during a crisis, and then you find a way to open it back up again. Anyway.
For me, like, I get wrapped around deadlines and like short-term, 20-meter targets, and it'll make me emotional. And one of my like reset methods is like, okay, let's zoom out, big picture. Like, this is actually a very small target. It doesn't affect the grand scheme of things that much. Like, and that helps calm me down, and then I can better address whatever that issue is.
Absolutely. It's almost an example of reframing, if you will, right? You're going to learn about reframing when we talk design. But I mean, these reframing is useful in just day-to-day life, right? Where, you can say, I've been looking at this really, really closely and all the details, but I'm going to open up my aperture, look at it from the big picture, and then I'm going to go back in again. Do that a couple of times, and suddenly the problem looks different and more manageable, right?
Another example is when I was going through Ivy as a student, we would get smoked a lot, like, physical punishment for things, and it'd be super miserable, and you wouldn't know how long you're going to be doing flutter kicks or push-ups or whatever it was. And one time we were going, and we were all just feeling sorry for ourselves, and I remember the NCO was like, gentlemen, it's going to end. Like, it's going to stop. You're not going to die. You're going to be fine. And I was like, oh, yeah, like, that's good. And then every time I was getting smoked, I thought of that, and it made it a lot more manageable.
Well, and that goes back to this, that thing that helps you emotionally reset. Yep. Did you have something?
Childbirth.
Childbirth? Okay, fair enough.
I had two of my kids I had without anything, so for sure, just that same thing, like it will end.
This will end.
And also it's coming for a good reason, it brings something good about it.
Yes, thank you. Trevor?
I like how when you put it out there as like long-term horizon, war story. In southern Nangarhar, special forces operators trying to clear through the valley. And they go to the one house that's like in the middle of the valley. If there is any predictability of the enemy to know like where they would stop for a reset, it was probably going to be that house. And they decided to go into that house that was booby trapped, and in an instant, 1 KIA and 30 others injured from the explosion in that house. And of course, we're the air weapons team that's on station. What does everybody want to do? Everybody wants to put their sensors right on that house.
Sure.
Where everything just happened. And that's where that tunnel vision went. And you had to realize that happened to enable something else to happen.
Yes.
Which means we got to stop looking at this and look down the valley because there's something else that's coming. And sure was. And so we got the rest of the mission. We got other aircraft in, and that turned into obviously one of the more traumatic operations, but ended up being one of the most successful joint operations that I've ever seen happen in Afghanistan in my time there.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. That really, do you see what we're sort of going for here? Because this is really a key field grade skill. Because yes, you have to pay attention to the details, but at some point you've got to actually look out at the big picture. But you can't forget the details. So this process of zooming in and zooming out is something that you've got to get skilled at doing. Just if you ever do sticks lanes with these reaction courses, where and you're training your people, keep an eye on whose eyes are where, right? So if somebody's doing a room clearing, and they're in the 4-person stack, they're doing one thing that's very, very detailed. But there better be a leader who's got their eyes head on a swivel and looking around to see what else is going on. And go to your point, Trevor, which is very helpful, is that, the big picture, because sometimes the enemy's trying to get your attention and they want to keep it there, right? I've used this myself, we're going to do this operation over here to convince the enemy that that's our focus and that our focus is over here. And so they do the same thing to us.
Oh, they do.
They do. Okay. Thank you for that. That's great. Okay, and this is a key thing to help us. It's about that looking at the horizon. What was it we were supposed to do here? What was it that we wanted to accomplish? And so what is our goal? Remember we talked about problem statements, right? What's the end state that we're trying to get? And so when we get, our attention drawn to something that's really intended to draw our attention away, a good way to get our focus back where it belongs is looking at the big picture, and especially the big thing, that thing that we were told to accomplish, right? Has ever, heard this story, right, where somebody says, if everything's a priority, how do you answer that sentence?
Nothing's
a priority, right? Have you ever been exposed to that tyranny? It's no fun, is it? What if a commander said to you, if you get nothing else done, get this done? Have you ever heard that? What does that make you feel like? Oh, thank God. Right? I mean, that's a wonderful moment. You go, now I know the one thing the boss says I've got to get done in order to succeed. So again, it's about that. What is the thing that we must accomplish? And a lot of that stuff goes back to these emotions that I'm trying to help us walk our way through. Because when did everybody know who Sisyphus was? Yeah. He upset the gods, and they condemned him to roll a rock up a hill, only to watch it roll back down again for all of eternity. Have you ever felt that way when working sometimes? I'm here at the rock again. I thought last time I did the rock, I didn't want to do it again, and now here I am doing it again. That goes back to burning your people out. If you engage them in what feels like a futile endeavor, this will wear out their ability to actually be resilient and get done what you want them to get done. Okay. All right, this is an exercise I call it the hill we take. And here's what I want you to do. Take out some piece of paper, something to write with, and list your 3 most important goals for this year. I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay. So here's what I want you to do now. Okay. Consider what happens when you have competing priorities, right? So if those are 3 of your most important priorities, how do we relook those, reframe those? Sort of like we were just talking about, looking specifically, now going out and necking it out to a bigger picture and then back down again. So here's what I want. Here's the second part of the hill we take. I want you then to rank order those 3 most important goals, and then we'll discuss it. Okay? So I want you to do that. Okay? So take a minute to reorder them, and then get in groups of 3 with maybe one group of 2, and discuss it with your colleagues. Okay? I will give you 5 minutes to accomplish that. Okay. Great discussion. Glad to see this. Okay. So this is one of the reasons why, we're talking about this, because goals can help you exit fear and anger, right? Remember what I said when the commander says, if you get nothing else done, get this done, and how freeing that was for people in his command? Because now, when there's ambiguity in the world's got ambiguity in it, trust me, you're going to have plenty of that complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty. And when you can then say, okay, I get it, that's confusing and unpleasant, but now here's the first step I need to take. At least now, and I don't know about y'all, but at least when I'm starting to move, I start to feel more, at least a little better. Like, have you ever been in a traffic jam, a really bad one, and you're just stuck there and you just feel trapped? And then suddenly you start to move. What does that emotionally feel like for you?
Relief.
Hey, finally, we're going to get out of here. I was going to be here for the rest of my life. This is finally going to end at some point. And that's what we're talking about cognitively. Exiting that fear and anger. Because in a traffic jam, I feel both. You know what I mean? It's like I'm ticked off at the drivers around me half the time that are doing weird things. And I don't want to get ran into from behind because somebody didn't notice there's a traffic jam, right? So getting a first step plan or a second step plan can be very reassuring in helping us deal with fear and anger. Okay? And that goes back to problems 1, 2, and 3 we mentioned at the beginning of this class, right? How to avoid freezing up when we are fearful, and to avoid rashness when we're angry and not becoming disorganized, right? You know, that we end up trying to accomplish everything, right? And then if everything's a priority, nothing is. Okay? Okay, so that's C-153 alpha. Okay, so here's just sort of a quick review of what we talked about. Okay, so volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. These are all things, or complexity and ambiguity, all these things that causes us to get into a fight or fright type of situation. You know, and sometimes that is helpful and sometimes that can be unhelpful. Okay, emotionally resetting can help us use those emotions to our benefit, rather than allow those emotions to dominate us. And yet, at the same time, we want to use those things so that we can have a sense of urgency to match the situation that you're in, right? Which means you have to make a new plan. You got to be adaptive, right? There was a saying in the first FM3-24, the COIN manual, that I thought was interesting, and they said COIN is this way, but I think life is this way. And they said COIN situation is a learning competition. The side that learns the fastest wins. I don't think that's true for COIN. I think it's true for life, right? In any situation you find yourself in, adaptation and learning, you know, is the key. Okay. So, for example, how many here consider themselves educators? Okay, 1, 2. Oh, look, if you're a field grade educator, if you haven't been so yet, become so now. Because you got to teach people, and they need to learn. And the quicker they learn and the more adaptive they become, the better off they are at dealing with this stuff and help us come up with plans that are viable, right? Can actually work. Can maybe even be one of those examples of something that's maybe not the most optimal thing, but still will work, and the enemy will never see it coming, okay? And then remembering that if we can stay focused on what was the big thing that we were told to get done, right? What is the big central goal that we were asked to accomplish so that we can stay focused and get that first step plan? And so that's how you avoid leadership failure. Okay, so that's really C-153, unmasking leadership failures. The next one is C-153 Bravo, and that is identifying exceptional information. And that is extremely important because that's how leaders can succeed. If you can anticipate that threat or opportunity that you hadn't planned for, that the enemy is trying to spring on you, and you could be ready for it. And better yet, you can take that exceptional information that you discovered and turn it around on your opponent and create exceptional information that you can inflict upon them. And it's not a guarantee of victory, but usually the side that surprises the other side the most will prevail. Okay? So, you know, to sort of paraphrase George Patton, you know, he says, you know, nobody won a war by giving his life for his country. They won it by getting the other guy to give his life for their country. You remember that saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So my point is, this is a thinking person's game, okay? You know, the side that wins usually is the most adaptive and learning side, okay? So that's what I want you guys to think about. Good. All right, let's take a break. We'll reconvene. Let's shoot for 14:30.
Yeah.
Okay, good.